the only way to yourself is being yourself. That's why in this approach the path and the goal are the same. That would be one way of distinguishing this direct approach from the more progressive paths. In the progressive paths there is a pathway to a goal. The goal is achieved at the end of the pathway. Here we start with the goal. The beginning, the journey, and the destination are the same. We start with being aware. Being aware is where we start. Being aware is the journey or the path, and being aware is where we end. That's the direct path. Our self is very ordinary. Our self is the most ordinary element of experience. Everything is extraordinary compared to the knowing of our own being. Even the taste of tea is extraordinary compared to the simplicity of our own being. Just our ordinary, everyday, familiar, intimate, obvious being. That's it. Nothing could be more ordinary. Nothing could be more... Well, once it is obvious, nothing could be more obvious. When it is not obvious, nothing could be less obvious. But once it is obvious, you wonder how you ever didn't notice it. It's like a painter spending her whole life painting in the landscape, and at the end of her life realizing, all I've ever seen are modulations of light. How could I ever have missed that? Once that is obvious, it cannot be unseen. In fact, once that is obvious, you realize you don't see anything in the landscape apart from modulations of light. How did you ever think you saw anything other than that? So our self is like that. All our lives we have been talking about ourself, talking about me, my feelings, my experience, my activities, my relationships, my feelings. I feel this, I think that, I see this, I, all the way through our lives. And yet we seem not to have seen or known ourselves clearly because we have been so infatuated with experience. And then one day the focus of our attention softens or through some other means. Our self comes out of the background of experience and is noticed, and we wonder how we ever overlooked it. We look back on all the practices that many of us did. How many people here have not been involved in some spiritual practice for a year or 2 years or a decade or 2 decades? How many people have not been involved in some prior practice? Well, 1 or 2 people out of almost 200. You look back on all the things that we did, not only the things we did in conventional life, in search of peace and happiness, but the things we did in our spiritual life, the practices, the devotions, the teachers, everything, the whole spiritual paraphernalia that we engaged in, some of us for decades. What were we trying to do? All we were trying to do was to recognize ourself, to access the innate peace of ourselves. That's all we were trying to do. That's all the spiritual literature is about. And so when we finally feel that we have direct access to the simplicity of our own being and its innate peace, we look back with disbelief at what we used to do. Of course, it was necessary for us to do it. As many of you know, I practiced mantra meditation for 20 years. I needed to do that. When I look back now on those years, I wonder how come myself was not clear to me then. Why did it remain hidden for so long? It is so simple, it is so obvious, it is so familiar, it is so intimate.
I'm surprised that, because I was really aware knowingly, as you said, but this is the first time that now this awareness seems to be, and I kind of experienced the peace that came with that awareness. I've been focused on an awareness, but I'm surprised at the joy,
yes,
and the happiness, and I mean, I have nothing against it, of course.
Yeah. For many people, we first, our recognition of ourself seems first to be something neutral in the background of experience. And then as we abide there, its quality of peace begins to impress itself upon us, and in time, its quality of joy.
And love.
And finally, love. That's the normal order. First neutral, then peace, then happiness, and then love. Because it's neutral, peaceful, and happy qualities are qualities that we experience only within ourselves. Whereas the last quality, the loving quality, is something that is shared with everyone, the sense that our being is shared. It's not always obvious when we first recognize the nature of our being, that our being is the same being, is shared by all beings. That's the experience of love, the recognition that our being is shared. So that the love sometimes, not always, this is not always the case, but the love in many cases comes later.
At least for now, I think I'm not there, but the big happiness comes also from the disappearance of the separation from myself, and I would say the self-rejection, or the kind of the distance that I was putting between me and awareness.
No, happiness doesn't require the disappearance of everything. Remember Balayani describing, he said, I think I quoted it last night, Balayani said that the Sufis say, whosoever knows their self knows their Lord. They do not say, whosoever gets rid of themselves or annihilates themselves knows their Lord. It's not necessary to get rid of anything. Ultimately, there is no... If you believe that there is a separate self that needs to be got rid of in order to access your innate happiness, then by believing so, you are giving the separate self too much credibility. You are asserting the existence of a separate self by suggesting that it needs to be got rid of. There is no separate self to get rid of. There is just your own unlimited being, which you share with all beings, which is seemingly qualified by experience, and therefore seems to become a temporary, finite self, but in fact never does so. There is no separate self that needs to be disciplined or got rid of for the experience of happiness. All that is necessary is to go directly to ourself.
I've been meditating for at least 12 years, consistent practice, and I probably have asked this question before from my Buddhist teachers, but my awareness it will rest back for a few seconds, but it always loves to find objects. I always hear that eventually you have dispassion for the outer world or for the objects, but in my experience, my mind gets bored if I stay too long in awareness of awareness. I'll get tight. I mean, I've tried staying there, but I know that's not the way because it's just painful. Is it all right just for my mind just to go to objects? I mean, now I'm aware of this being known, and it's like I wake up. All of a sudden I'm in a thought or I'm hearing something, and awareness wakes me up and go, oh, this is being known in awareness. So there I am for 3, 4, 5 seconds until something else.
Yeah. Okay. So for a mind that is accustomed to losing itself in the content of experience, this return to itself, return to its own essence, this is the path of self-inquiry or meditation. And this is recommended for one whose attention is continually or almost continually mixed up with the content of experience, this tracing our way back, or the mind's tracing its way back to its own essential nature. And as a result, as you say, as the mind relaxes the focus of its attention from the content of experience, that the mind, so to speak, tastes or recognizes its own essence again, and then through force of habit or circumstance, it turns around, so to speak, and goes back out towards the objects of experience. And then after some time we notice that we are lost in the content of experience, we come back again. So there is this back and forth. And in many traditions, the resting of attention in its source is privileged over the resting of attention or the giving of attention to the objects of experience. So, and you may have belonged, or you may belong to one such tradition, in which case you will feel a little guilty that your attention isn't able to rest forever in your true nature, and that guilty, therefore, that you should ever again attend, God forbid, to a thought or a feeling or a sensation or a perception or anything. So these are the monastic traditions where objective experience is considered to be a danger, a distraction. And it's true that in the early stages of our investigation, due to the habit of giving our attention exclusively to the content of experience, we do need to, if not turn away from the content of experience, at least relax our attention from its content, come back to ourselves, and begin to become, first of all, to recognize, oh, what I essentially am is the presence of awareness, and then to stay there long enough to understand, and when I say understand, I mean experience for ourselves, not just the fact that I am the presence of awareness, but the qualities, if we can call them qualities, of the awareness that I am, the fact that it is ever present, unlimited, inherently peaceful, etc. We'll explore this more. So there is good reason for resting in one's being in order to sink more and more deeply into it and to experience or to know fully for oneself its innate qualities. But then we should be happy. We should feel free to go back out to objective experience. In fact, in this approach, we must go back out. This is not a path of renunciation. It's not a monastic path.
It's not dispassion from the world, in a sense.
No, and not only that. From this approach, if the peace that we find on the recognition of our true nature is so fragile that the moment we go back out into the world, we lose it, then it is not really worthy of the name. It is not real peace. It is a fragile state of mind that we are mistaking for the peace of our true nature. The peace of our true nature is unshakable. And it is necessary, it is obligatory to go back out into the world for many reasons, but for one reason, to test the peace of one's true nature and to make sure that it is unshakable, to make sure that it is not simply a fragile state of mind. So we should happily return to the world and allow our experiential understanding to be tested by the fire of experience.
And that doesn't mean that the experience could be unpleasant and your body will, maybe tense up. But the awareness of it is just going, oh, unpleasant is being known. There's
Yes.
a piece there, but there still can be
Yes.
some tension showing up in your body, correct?
Well, it's important that there is tension in the body. I mean, none of us would be sitting on our chairs if there were not tension, and a certain amount of tension is necessary to walk, for instance, or so don't feel that tension in the body is something negative.
No.
The only tension in the body that in time dissolves is the tension that is derived solely from the belief that we are a temporary finite self or consciousness. That belief has a counterpart in the body, and that in the form of tensions and contractions, and those tensions do dissolve. But the other tensions, the functional tensions, they remain. So there is, just to finish what I was saying before, that there is, to begin with, in the early stages of our investigation, there is this back and forth. It's either experience or it is ourself, the presence of awareness. And experience seems to, our knowledge of experience seems to compete with and be at odds with our knowledge of ourself, hence this feeling of back and forth. But in time, the more this new understanding of ourself becomes our new default identity, we then cease going back and forth so much. When we go back out into experience, we feel that we take ourselves with us wherever we go. So experience begins to lose its capacity to take us away from ourselves. And then we can go out into experience, into any realm of experience that we like, because experience can no longer take us away from ourselves. And then there is no longer any back and forth, and there is no longer any distinction between awareness and experience. That is the last stage I refer to. So it's just, you've been 12 years on this back and forth path. Either experience or awareness. You've been going back and forth between the two. So now, and your reason for being here this week is to collapse the conflict between giving your attention to yourself or giving your attention to experience. So hopefully by the end of the week you won't be able to tell the difference between giving your attention to experience and giving attention to yourself. Experience and awareness is the same thing.
Okay, let's say I'm just resting back in awareness, and then the mind goes out, and it's like I wake up after just like one thought. It goes, oh, you've been thinking. So I wasn't aware initially of the thought coming up and going. It's like you kind of wake up after the one.
But you see, you're bringing this old, this conditioning from your old teaching to bear on this investigation. I can tell from what you're thinking from what you're saying, that thinking is a problem. Thinking is...
Okay, so it's not a problem.
You're still thinking that thinking is a distraction from myself. Thinking is problematic. I need to get rid of it in order to be aware of myself.
I think I understand. Thank you.
And I'm a fellow recovering Buddhist, and and practiced a lot of mindfulness and such. And I noticed that these days I kind of resist even sitting meditation, but I very often have awareness arise in the midst of whatever. I'm brushing my teeth and, oh, I'm aware of I'm brushing my teeth, or I'm driving and, oh, I'm aware of this now. Something in me enjoys that moment of like, here I am aware of what's happening right now, as opposed to identified with what's happening. And as you say, there is that kind of guilt and also disappointment about getting lost in it again or identified with it again. And you say this thing about, well, that doesn't happen unless you give it permission, but I'm not aware of how to withdraw permission. And there's this desire to not avoid objects, but to be aware of the process of being with objects, as opposed to being kind of lost in them.
Well, the way to stop giving your permission for experience to veil awareness is to understand that it doesn't. The way to stop giving permission for the movie to veil the screen is to see clearly that it doesn't. There's nothing inherent about brushing your teeth that prevents you from being knowingly the presence of awareness. It is you, awareness, that consents to lose yourself in the activity, and then you return to yourself, oh yes, I am aware. And then of your own volition, through force of habit or necessity, or circumstance, you, awareness, turn away, so to speak, from yourself, and you give yourself to the objective content of your experience, brushing your teeth in this case. And then you remember yourself, you come back to yourself, hence this back and forth. But in time, you find that brushing your teeth loses its power to veil yourself from yourself. In other words, you can fully engage in brushing your teeth, or indeed any other activity, without that activity obscuring your knowledge of yourself.
Well, I see that as a possibility, and I guess maybe it's something about giving up the attachment to getting there, as opposed to...
Well, just I'm going to pause you mid-sentence.
Yeah.
Now, become aware of yourself now. Yeah. Now just carry on the sentence, carry on the conversation, but don't let our conversation obscure the fact of being aware. Just keep going, chatting. And just keep going.
Yeah.
As if nothing happened. Nothing did happen on the outside. It was just a little intermission.
Nice.
Carry on with the conversation,
Nice.
but just carry on with the conversation, being aware of the fact that you are aware, and this awareness doesn't just reside behind our conversation, it permeates our conversation. In fact, it permeates your perception of this room. You don't need to stop talking, you don't need to stop thinking, you don't need to stop seeing this room. Just see that your experience is pervaded by the fact of being aware. Nothing needs to change outwardly. So now you no longer need to feel guilty when you're brushing your teeth. You can just thoroughly enjoy it. And
No, it's not that. It's not.
I was only kidding.
Yeah, it's more like a longing or a disappointment for that you're staying aware in the middle of the experience. Just like...
Yes, and as I said, in a neutral experience such as this, there's nothing very demanding about our conversation. So it's quite easy now for you to remain aware of, for you to allow the fact of being aware to permeate your experience. But there is...
Well, I wouldn't say quite easy.
Okay, well let's...
In the sense that I'll be like attending and seemingly awake, and then start thinking about a lot of stuff, and then again, as the other woman was saying, sort of have the moment of like, oh, what have I been thinking about for the last 5 minutes?
Okay, that may be so, but more and more you will find that in neutral circumstances such as these, that you remain in touch with the fact of being aware whilst fully engaging in experience. However, and this is the point that I wanted to make, there are some experiences that require 100% of our attention, in which case, they, for instance, crises in our life. We live in Santa Rosa, and we get a text message: evacuate immediately. And you have 2 minutes to find your 2 cats, your passport, your. So, in a situation, in a high emergency situation like this, it is very natural for 100% of your attention to go to the object, in which case you may overlook or forget the fact of being aware, and it is completely natural to do so. That's not a cause for guilt or shame or regret. It's not a failure of your enlightened understanding. It is just an appropriate response to the moment. The moment needs my 100% attention. And then you deal with whatever it is. You find your cats and your passport and your friends, and you do whatever is necessary. You turn off the gas, you get into your car, and you drive down the road. 10 minutes later, you're in safety, and then just naturally, your awareness of yourself comes back, or rather, your awareness begins to soften its focus from the content of your experience because it's no longer an emergency, and just because it goes back to its default position, resting in itself, because it is no longer required by the circumstances. So don't feel that somehow for you awareness to give your attention fully to the object is somehow a failure. It's not. If it's appropriate, do it. And then when the circumstances no longer require it, just in time this habit will develop of just coming back to yourself until your attention is required again by circumstances, and you will go out again. Your awareness will go out again towards the object. But in time, this, as I said, this going out, fewer and fewer situations will have the capacity to completely eclipse the knowing of our own being.
And it may be too much of a how-to question, but what about that strengthening of that habit of returning to home, to awareness in the now?
The only way to strengthen the habit of returning home is being home. The only way to yourself is being yourself. That's why in this approach the path and the goal are the same. That would be one way of distinguishing this direct approach from the more progressive paths. In the progressive paths there is a pathway to a goal. The goal is achieved at the end of the pathway. Here we start with the goal. The beginning, the journey, and the destination are the same. We start with being aware. Being aware is where we start. Being aware is the journey or the path, and being aware is where we end. That's the direct path.